Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, and welcome to the final part of this year's forum. These have been energetic and productive days. It's been moving to see the animated conversations in every corner of Oxford since Tuesday evening. And I hope that this final session propels you to yet more conversations, yet more reflection, yet more action. In the words of one of yesterday's sessions, I hope that it gives you more permission. We will hear first today from Larry Brilliant about meeting some big future challenges. Ed Miliband and Bill Drayton will then lead a discussion about how best to create frameworks to maximize social innovation. Finally, we'll hear from 4 social entrepreneurs and from you before the Dean of the School formally closes proceedings. Larry Brilliant's biography might have been scripted in Hollywood. Are you listening, participant? He is the director of Skoll.org and works to reduce global poverty, improve the health of the least advantaged, and to halt or reverse the effects of climate crisis. He's an MD, MPH, founder and director of the Seaver Foundation, co-founder of The Well, has started and run venture-backed and publicly quoted technology companies, has authored 2 books and dozens of articles. He is, needless to say, a distinguished social entrepreneur and a very welcome guest. Larry.
Good morning. Thank you very much. As I was sitting there and I was looking up and noticing that it was the Nelson Mandela Lecture Theater. It's quite an honor to be speaking from this podium, but it's no less of an honor to be speaking to you. I felt yesterday such a spirit of oneness, magic, a little pixie dust in the air. It's really an honor to be here. Jeff, thank you very much. Sally, thank you very much. So Sally has asked me not to talk about the Google Foundation or Google.org. Instead, I'm going to try to give you a view of the world as I see it, the problems and the opportunities that we face, and then ask the question if we should be optimistic or pessimistic. And then I'll let you in on a secret, which is why I am an incurable optimist. Let me start off showing you an Al Gore movie that you may have seen before. Now, you've all seen Inconvenient Truth. This is a little more inconvenient.
Extremely dangerous questions, because with our present knowledge we have no idea what would happen. Even now, man may be unwittingly changing the world's climate through the waste products of his civilization. Due to our release through factories and automobiles every year of more than 6 billion tons of carbon dioxide, which helps air absorb heat from the sun, our atmosphere seems to be getting warmer. This is bad. Well, it's been calculated a few degrees rise in the Earth's temperature would melt the polar ice caps. And if this happens, an inland sea would fill a good portion of the Mississippi Valley. Tourists in glass-bottom boats would be viewing the drowned towers of Miami through 150 feet of tropical water. For in weather, we're not only dealing with forces of a far greater variety than even the atomic physicist encounters, but with life itself.
And that's true. we're dealing with life itself. And I don't know, and I've asked Jeff, if we should feel optimistic or pessimistic that 50 years ago we knew the major elements involved in global warming. Should we feel good or should we feel bad that 50 years of foreknowledge accomplished so little? Well, it depends really on what your goals are. And I think as my goals, I always go back to Gandhi's talisman. When Mahatma Gandhi was asked, how do you know if the next act that you are about to do is the right one or the wrong one? He said, consider the face of the poorest, most vulnerable human being that you ever chanced upon, and ask yourself if the act that you contemplate will be of benefit to that person. And if it will be, it's the right thing to do. And if not, rethink it. For those of us in this room, it's not just the poorest and the most vulnerable individual. It's the community. It's the culture. It's the world itself. And the trends for those who are at the periphery of our society, who are the poorest and the most vulnerable, the trends give rise to a great case for pessimism. But there's also a wonderful case for optimism. Let's review them both. First of all, the megatrends. There's 2 degrees or 3 degrees of climate change baked into the system. It will cause rising seas. It will cause saline deposited into wells and into lands. It will disproportionately harm the poorest and the most vulnerable, as will the increasing rise of population. Even though we've dodged Paul Ehrlich's population bomb and we will not see 20 billion people in this decade as he has forecast, we eat as if we were 20 billion. And we consume so much that, again, a rise of 6.5 billion to 9.5 billion in our grandchildren's lifetime will disproportionately hurt the poorest and the most vulnerable. That's why they migrate to cities. That's why in June of this year we passed as a species 51% of us living in cities and busties and slums and shantytowns. The rural areas are no longer producing as much food as they did. The Green Revolution never reached Africa. And with desertification, sandstorms, the Gobi Desert, the Agadan, we are finding increasing difficulty of a hectare to produce as many calories as it did even 15 years ago. So humans are turning more towards animal consumption. In Africa last year, Africans ate 600 million wild animals and consumed 2 billion kilograms of bushmeat. And every kilogram of bushmeat contained hundreds of thousands of novel viruses that have never been charted, the genomic sequences of which we don't know. Their fitness for creating pandemics we are unaware of. But we are ripe for zoonotic-borne emerging communicable diseases. Increasingly, I would say explosive growth of technology. Most of us are the beneficiaries of that growth. But it has a dark side in bioweapons and in technology that puts us on a collision course to magnify any anger, hatred, or feeling of marginalization. And in fact, with increasing globalization, for which there are big winners and even bigger losers, today the world is more diverse and unfair than perhaps it has ever been in history. 1% of us own 40% of all the goods and services. What will happen if the billion people today who live on less than $1 a day rise to 3 billion in the next 30 years? The 1% will own even more than 40% of all the world's goods and services, not because they've grown richer, but because the rest of the world has grown increasingly poorer. Last week, Bill Clinton at the TED Awards said, "This situation is unprecedented, unequal, unfair, and unstable." So there's lots of reason for pessimism. Darfur is, at its origin, a resource war. Last year, there were 85,000 riots in China, 230 a day that required police or military intervention. Most of them were about resources. We are facing an unprecedented number, scale of disasters. Some are weather-related, human rights-related, epidemics. And the newly emerging diseases may make H5N1 and bird flu a quaint forerunner of things to come. It's a destabilized world. And unlike destabilized world in the past, it will be broadcast to you on YouTube. You will see it on digital television and on your cell phones. What will that lead to? For some, it will lead to anger, religious and sectarian violence, and terrorism. For others, withdrawal, nihilism, materialism. For us, where does it take us as social activists and entrepreneurs? As we look at these trends, do we become despondent, or will we become energized? Let's look at one case, the case of Bangladesh. First, it's important to understand that even if carbon dioxide emissions stopped today, global warming would continue. And even with global warming, if you can see these blue lines, the dotted line shows that even if emissions of greenhouse gases stop today, the next decades will see rising sea levels. A minimum of 20 to 30 inches of increase in sea levels is the best case that we can hope for, and it could be 10 times that. What will that do to Bangladesh? Let's take a look. So here's Bangladesh. 70% of Bangladesh is at less than 5 feet sea level, above sea level. Let's go up and take a look at the Himalayas, and we'll watch as global warming makes them melt, more water comes down, the deforested areas here in the Terai will be unable to absorb the effluent because trees are like straws that suck up the extra seasonal water. Now we're looking down south through the Kali Gandaki. Many of you, I think, have probably trekked here. And we're going to cruise down and take a look at Bangladesh and see what the impact will be of twin increases in water coming from the north and then the seas rising from the south. Looking at the 5 major rivers that feed Bangladesh. And now let's look from the south, looking up, and let's see this in relief. Minimum of 20 to 40 inches of increase in seas, coupled with increasing flows from the Himalayas. And take a look at this. As many as 100 million refugees from Bangladesh could be expected to migrate into India and into China. This is the difficulty that one country faces. But if you look at the globe, all around the earth, wherever there is low-lying area, populated areas near the water, you will find increase in sea level that will challenge our way of life. Sub-Saharan Africa, and even our own San Francisco Bay Area. I just want to point out to my friends that Google is right there, surrounded by water. We are all in this together. This is not something that happens far away to people that we don't know. Global warming is something that happens to all of us all at once, as are these newly emerging communicable diseases. Names that you hadn't heard 20 years ago: Ebola, Lassa fever, monkeypox. With the erosion of the green belt separating animals from humans, we live in each other's viral environment. Do you remember 20 years ago, no one had ever heard of West Nile fever, and then we watched as one case arrived on the east coast of the United States, and it marched every year westwardly? Do you remember no one had heard of Ebola until we heard of hundreds of people dying in Central Africa from it? It's just the beginning, unfortunately. There have been 30 novel, emerging, communicable diseases that begin in animals that have jumped species in the last 30 years. It's more than enough reason for pessimism. But now let's look at the case for optimism. Enough of the bad news. Human beings have always risen to the challenge. You just need to look at the list of Nobel laureates to remind ourselves we've been here before, paralyzed by fear, paralyzed into inaction, when some, probably one of you in this room, jumped into the breach and created an organization like Physicians for Social Responsibility, which fought against the nuclear threat. Médecins Sans Frontières, that renewed our commitment to disaster relief. Mohammed al-Baradi, and the tremendous hope and optimism that he brought all of us, and our own Muhammad Yunus. We've seen the eradication of smallpox. We may see the eradication of polio this year. Last year, there were only 2,000 cases in the world. We may see the eradication of guinea worm next year. There are only 35,000 cases left in the world. 20 years ago, there were 3.5 million. And we've seen a new disease, not like the 30 novel emerging communicable diseases. This disease is called sudden wealth syndrome. It's an amazing phenomenon. All throughout the technology world, we're seeing young people bitten by this disease of sudden wealth syndrome. But they're using their wealth in a way that their forefathers never did. They're not waiting until they die to create foundations. They're actively guiding their money, their resources, their hearts, their commitments to make the world a better place. Certainly nothing can give you more optimism than that. Skoll is one great example. More reasons to be optimistic. In the 60s, and I am a creature of the 60s, there was a movement. We all felt that we were part of it, that a better world was right around the corner, that we were watching the birth of a world free of hatred and violence and prejudice. Today, there's another kind of movement. It's a movement to save the earth. It's just beginning. 5 weeks ago, a group of activists from the business community gathered together to stop a Texas utility from building 9 coal-fired electrical plants that would have contributed to destroying the environment. 6 months ago, a group of business activists gathered together to join with the Republican governor in California to pass AB 32, the most far-reaching legislation in environmental history. Al Gore made presentations in the House and the Senate as an expert witness. Can you imagine? We're seeing an entente cordiale between science and religion that 5 years ago I would not have believed, as the evangelical community has understood the desperate situation of global warming, and now 4,000 churches have joined the environmental movement. It is something to be greatly optimistic about. The European 2020 plan is an amazing breakthrough, something that should make all of us feel that hope is on the horizon. And On April 14th, there will be Step Up Day, where there will be 1,000 individual mobilized social activist movements in the United States on protest against legislation, pushing for legislation to stop global warming. And on July 7th, around the world, I learned only yesterday, there will be global Live Earth concerts. And you can feel this optimistic move to save the Earth in the air. Now, that doesn't mean that people understand that global warming hurts the poorest and the weakest the most. That means that people are beginning the first step, which is acting out of their own self-interest. But I am seeing in the major funders, in CARE, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Hewlett, Mercy Corps, you guys, Google, so many other organizations, a beginning of understanding that we need to work not just on primary prevention of global warming, but on the secondary prevention of the consequences of global warming on the poorest and the most vulnerable. But for me, I have another reason to be an incurable optimist. And you've heard so many inspiring stories here, and I heard so many last night, that I thought I would share a little bit of mine, because I am the most improbable of all people to be standing in front of you today. But I have seen thousands of little babies die of smallpox. I've held hundreds die in my arms, watching them die without any hope or any medicine to give them. And now that disease no longer exists. Nothing can make you more optimistic than to look into the face of hell itself and then to know that that disease has been eradicated. So let me tell you a little bit of my story. My background is not exactly conventional medical training. After my internship, I acted in a Warner Brothers movie, and I played a young doctor with a bunch of rock and roll musicians living in a bunch of psychedelic painted buses. You may have heard the expression, you're either on the bus or off the bus. I was most decidedly on the bus. The Medicine Ball Caravan began in San Francisco, and we wended our way through the Khyber Pass, changing buses, of course, at the ocean. And if you see this psychedelic painted bus and this strange-looking hippie, you'd have to ask yourself, who the hell would ever hire him to do anything important? I wonder about that all the time. And we took a trip over the Khyber Pass that had some moments. To get to India, and I lived in a Himalayan monastery, and I studied with a very wise teacher who kicked me out of the monastery one day and told me that it was my destiny. It felt like Yoda. It is your destiny to go to work for WHO and to help eradicate smallpox at a time when there was no smallpox program and there was no hope of eradicating smallpox. But his prediction came true. And this little girl is Rahima Banu, and she was the last case of variola major. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how that happened. It should make you optimistic that smallpox no longer exists, because it was the worst disease in history. In the last century, that's the one that was 7 years ago, 500 million people died from smallpox, more than all the wars in history, more than any other infectious disease in the history of the world. In the Summer of Love, in 1967, 2 million people, children, died of smallpox. It's not ancient history. When you read the biblical plague of boils, that was smallpox. Pharaoh Ramses V, whose picture is here, died of smallpox, as did hundreds of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the world. Now, this is my favorite slide in public health. Now, it's not my favorite slide because all these kings and queens and sovereigns died. It is my favorite slide because wealth alone, a sign that says armed response, a gated community, cannot separate you from the rest of humanity when we are 99.9% the same genetic material. This is my favorite slide because it says we are all in this together. And this is the disease of smallpox. And if you have a soft stomach, I recommend not looking at the next few slides. And I don't put this up for purulent interest. I put this up to make you feel proud of your species, that we have collectively conquered the worst disease that we have ever had. A disease which killed 1/3 of all who got it. This form of smallpox, hemorrhagic smallpox, which killed 100% of all who got it. To eradicate smallpox, we had to gather the largest United Nations army in history. My first job out of medical school, I had 150,000 people working for me. That's strange. We visited every house in India searching for smallpox, 120 million houses, once every month for nearly 2 years. We made over 1 billion house calls. Ask your local doctor how many house calls they've made. And in 1974, the peak of smallpox, there were 185,000 children who died in India. I visited villages where the rivers wouldn't flow because of the number of dead babies that have been thrown in the water. We heard stories of birds of prey flying, carrying little arms with spots on them. It was like a Hieronymus Bosch painting, like Dante's Inferno. To think that that disease no longer exists makes us look at global warming and the other challenges that we must face with renewed optimism and with vigor. We used a picture of a child with smallpox and went door to door. And in a cruel reversal, after we had almost conquered smallpox, and this is what you must learn as a social entrepreneur, the realm of the final inch. When we had almost eradicated smallpox, it came back again because the company town of Tatanagar drew laborers who could come there and get employment. And they caught smallpox in the one remaining place that had smallpox. And they went home to die. And when they did, they took smallpox to 10 other countries and reignited the epidemic. And we had to start all over again. But in the end, we succeeded. We used rewards, advertising, and the last case of smallpox, this little girl, Rahima Banu, Barishal in Bangladesh, ironically, full circle, in Bangladesh, when she coughed or breathed, and the last virus of smallpox left her lungs and fell on the dirt, and the sun killed that last virus. Thus ended a chain of transmission of history's greatest horror. How can that not make you optimistic? A disease which killed hundreds of thousands in India and blinded half of all of those who were made blind in India, ended. And most importantly for us here in this room, a bond was created. Doctors, health workers from 30 different countries of every race, every religion, every color, worked together, fought alongside each other, fought against a common enemy, didn't fight against each other. How can that not make you feel optimistic for the future? Thank you very much. I can't take it. It's taped in.
Inappropriately, given what it is I'm supposed to be doing, I'm speechless. Thank you very much. John Elkington is the co-founder of Sustainability and a world authority on corporate responsibility and sustainable development. John's been described as the dean of the corporate responsibility movement, a job title we don't yet have in Oxford, though we probably should. John will introduce his co-panelists, Ed Miliband and Bill Drayton. Please join me in welcoming John Elkington.
We'll follow that. Good morning, everyone. This session is slightly different. It takes a conclusion from the rest of the sessions we've had to date, which is that social innovation of the sort that we've heard described here of these recent days is a good thing, and raises the question, what do we then do to ensure that there is more of it? Larry Brilliant, his story of the extinction of smallpox, just, again, like Stefan, takes my breath away. So, we've asked our two speakers, who I'll just say a few things about in a moment, Bill Drayton and Ed Miliband, to speak for 8 to 10 minutes each. If they get to 11 minutes, I'll start to hyperventilate. If they get to 12, I'll faint. So that we leave some time for discussion and conversation. And we did earlier on ask for questions to be put in for this session. And I was delighted to hear this morning that initially there was only one. It was on a post-it note. And it said, why? We then found that there were two other questions, which I've, well, we are in Oxford, it is a city of philosophers, among other things. But we then got into a couple of other spaces with two other questions. One was, is social entrepreneurship the flavor of the month? And if so, what can we do about it? And the second is, can Ed Miliband set up a very big fund of money to support social entrepreneurs? We'll come on to that in a moment. Let me just say a few things by way of introduction of our two speakers. I first came across Bill Drayton when he was at the Environmental Protection Agency, by reputation, not face-to-face. And some of you may have seen the survey that we did at Sustainability on social entrepreneurship. If you haven't seen it, and I've been beaten up endlessly because, well, there's some at the back, thank you, Maggie. It's out there, and if you can't get a copy, I can take your addresses and send you some printed copies. But the key point is, one of the things that we talk about there is the waves of social challenges to government and to business. And the first one, which basically started in the early 60s, forced much of business into a compliance mode and onto the defensive. And I think one of the signs, early signs of Bill Drayton's genius was that he did a bunch of things, but a couple of them really got into the business psyche. One of them was the notion of the bubble concept, which was, instead of just going to and regulating every single flange and outlet and so on that industrial site, put a hypothetical bubble over it and then regulate at that level and let business do what it does best, work out where to control those emissions most cost effectively. And the second thing he did was to launch the concept of emissions trading, which became central to the whole sort of Kyoto process. And I think you'll be hearing later on from Roger Martin, I think what that demonstrates is the key role of creativity. And it doesn't matter if it's in social enterprise or in mainstream business or in government, that's increasingly, I think, what we're talking about. But the other thing I want to just say about Bill, and this is he has a taste for history, as do I. He fought a very tough, challenging, successful business against somebody who was described as the fox in the chicken house, Anne Gorsuch at the Environmental Protection Agency, at a time when the Reagan administration was trying to eviscerate the EPA. And I remember that just simply to acknowledge what you did, Bill, but also to say this is going to be increasingly political. And I think that came through very forcefully in what Larry Brilliant had to say. Somebody who's very much in the world of politics is Ed Miliband. He's the Minister for the Third Sector. I've heard one or two social entrepreneurs in the last couple of days saying, we don't like being in the third sector, it makes us feel third class, but it's nice to have it formally acknowledged as part of the economy. And I remember when he did his maiden speech, which I think it was in May 2005, a couple of things stuck in my memory. One of them was that he comes from or represents a constituency which has the longest village in it in England. Secondly, that there is a church there in which Robin Hood and Maid Marian were meant to have been married. But much more importantly, the second thing that stuck in my mind was in 1940, his father came out of Belgium on the last boat before the Nazis came in, on the evening before. And I just raised that because in listening to some of the sessions in recent days, it's been very clear that we all dream of a better future, and that's great, that sort of vision inspires us. But if we can be sure of one thing, and this came through in some of Larry's earlier slides, we're going to have social, economic, political, and above all, ecological discontinuities. And the real test of our national, and in a sense, species character will be how we collectively respond to that. So I'm going to hand over initially to Bill, and remember that the question here is, social innovation is wonderful, but how do we get more of it? Bill.
Well, thank you. This is a meeting that always shakes up one's thinking, and when Jeff starts talking and says he intends to do something, you have a suspicion that it's likely to happen. So I've been contemplating for the last 2 days my transformation into Britney Spears with some trepidation. We are one of the, Larry's introduction I thought was just completely brilliant, because when you're faced with really big opportunities and challenges, we have to think big and act big, and that means we have to work together. And that's, I think, a large part of what this forum is about. So what I want to do is two things. Try to project and describe a little bit what the world of 3 to 10 years from now will be like, the world we're building. And then, as best I can, trying to capture some of the trends of thought of these 3 days, articulate some of the action steps that'll help us get there. And this historical moment that we're in, that we have been given the gift to serve, is, I think, exemplified by the fact that we used to have a small elite. Now you have to have everyone involved in change making. This is the most radical transformation in human society for 12,000 years, and we are right at the epicenter of it. Now, why do I think this is the tipping point? There's 2 basic reasons. We have to change. The agricultural revolution produced a tiny surplus. A few people moved into town, and they basically dealt with one another, and everyone else is more or less invisible. It was a very flat structure. Well, now we have got all these thousands and millions of moving pieces, and they're moving faster and faster, and a few percent can't deal with it. We need people everywhere adjusting everything continuously. We just have to have that. We can't work in the old way. And the second reason is very human. Ask yourself, what gives you the greatest satisfaction? We have the gift of being powerful, of being able to give, to make a big difference. Now imagine what it would be like if we didn't have that. How sad, frustrated, angry we would be. Well, that's where increasingly most people are. We have to change. And necessity really is our ally here. Now, how do we get, what is this world going to look like? Well, imagine anywhere you are, Instead of people turning their eyes away when they see something not working, they say, I can do this, this is going to be fun, because I can give. And the greatest gift you can give anyone is the ability to give, and to give in a big way. Well, this is a very, very different architecture. You have to really imagine every organization is not a few leaders, but it's everyone a change maker, a team. Google is such an organization. There are very few such organizations now. If we can get 20% of the kids to be powerful now so that we go 20 times the number of change makers in the next generation, then in every field organizations can be like Google. And they'll outcompete everyone else because that's the one sustainable competitive advantage. And then we're past the transition point. So we are right at the lip of this change, and that brings me to the second part. We can dispense with the definition issue because Sally and Roger's article is out, and it is the best, clearest explanation. And I just add a historical footnote. When I was an undergraduate and when I was a student here, we were trying to figure out what words to use. And Sally and Roger's article starts saying you start the definition by looking at the noun, the word entrepreneur. That's right. That's what we focused on. And entrepreneurs make complete nonsense of all other distinctions and barriers. So none of the other definitions are going to last because the entrepreneurs that are the heart of this will make nonsense of them. So that we can dispense with now, thank God. Scale. We have had a confusion in our discussion of scale, and I've heard it going away at this meeting. It's not, as in business, how do we gain control of a market? There's a much higher level of getting to scale. It's when we get everyone to be a change maker. We go into a local community, we disrupt because we say this doesn't work so well. Here is a user-friendly, better idea. And anyone here, please step up and do this. So we are mass recruiters of change makers, and that is a form of scale that's much more powerful. There's something even more powerful, and that's when we take all of us together working on a problem and say, what are the universal principles? For the key decision makers in that field, what are the universal principles that they will find important? Then we know it'll fly. And then all we've got to do is the entrepreneur's job of how do you get from where we are now to the new system? And that's something, again, where we can work together. This is Ashoka's second generation most important thing we're doing, and I think it's the core process that we'll have going forward. How do we think and work together to change the world, building on our individual entrepreneurship and going on? So those are much more powerful forms of scale, and again, this forum is a part of that. Now, the next thing is, what is our impact on the rest of the world? Business became entrepreneurial 3 centuries ago and took off. The reason that we are such a focal point of energy at the moment is that we are going through, have largely gone through that transition. So we're growing closer to business. And if you listen to the conversations here, a lot of it is about how do we, in fact, finish that transition? How do we get those energies working together? Social businesses, both Eunice and Abed and many others, hybrid value chain for us. It's all about that. And the financial, but a caution, we're not copying business here. We want to go better. We don't want to make the mistakes that business has made. Ethical fiber is important. It should be conscious. It's something we should build into our structure. We don't want to be measured by quantitative measures only. That doesn't do it. That's very destructive. Just think about what the impact of the IPO is. Once you have gone public, how possible is it for a corporation to jump to the next S-curve? Very difficult. Well, these are structural problems that coming together does not mean copying the mistakes. It means doing a better job together. Last night, Ed was trying to deal with a group of us, and everyone gave their opinion about what our relationship with government should be, and it was a cacophony. He did a wonderful job of dealing with it, but the one thing that was clear to me was that we don't have a point of view that makes any sense. Everyone has a different point of view. Now, why is that? I think the same thing is true at the universities. These are the two big remaining pre-modern, pre-entrepreneurial competitive sectors, and the citizen sector has been moving away from them and coming closer to have the same architecture as business. So it's getting harder and harder for us to understand government in universities. We have changed sides. Now, I think one of our challenges is how do we help the universities, how do we help government make the transition that we are still going through, but we probably are better at understanding and empathizing with than anyone else from pre-modern onward. And this is not asking how can we get government as it is to somehow help us with whatever our specific goal is, but it's stepping back and asking the bigger question, how do we help these two sets of institutions change? Since we're here at the universities, there's been this, I think, incredibly destructive, the logic is bureaucratic and it seems relentless, driving universities to narrower and narrower and narrower stovepipes, which are less and less relevant and less connected to the world and less useful to students. Well, of course, entrepreneurs are just the opposite. We tear down every barrier and distinction, which makes the two sides very hard to understand one another. But we have a real challenge here. How do we help those universities, those people in the universities who want to make the transition to a modern competitive world do it? So these are just some of the agenda items that I think come out of this session, and I just want to end with a plea. We have been given, I think, a sacred trust at a moment of time of great opportunity and risk, where we are at the epicenter of this very profound transformation, the biggest change in human society in 12,000 years. And we've got to think big, we've got to act big, we've got to work together. And every time you feel the pull of conventional thinking, the stovepipes, just remember what our trust is. And finally, I just want to thank Jeff, Sally, the team here, because this forum is one of the best, most trusting places for us to learn how to do that. Thank you.
Bill, thanks hugely. At that same dinner last night, Ed talked about one of the entrepreneurs that he admires in this country, Tim Smith. And a couple of us, Pamela Hartigan and I, spent Saturday with Tim in his vast great hole in the Cornish countryside, the Eden Project. And one of the things he said was, be very careful. And I think Ashoka, with your almost 2,000 entrepreneurs, the Skoll Foundation, with the extraordinary people that you're now pulling together. I mean, one of the most moving events of the year was that session in the Sheldonian as the new generation of entrepreneurs came forward. But we should be very careful about over-focusing on heroic individuals. And I think it's not just me who says this, and I think a number of people have said that the number 2, number 3, number 4 people around those individuals are absolutely crucial. But the context, the operating environment in which they do what they do is absolutely essential. And Tim Smith would say, without government support, both from the UK and from the EU, he simply couldn't have done what he's done. So Ed, over to you.
Well, look, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to start by thanking Jeff Skoll, really, for all the work he does here at the Centre and for this great event. I haven't been here for very long, probably about 15 hours or so, but I too have been feeling the sense of buzz and excitement and indeed mutual admiration. Someone came up to me last night and said, I think you're a pretty unique politician. And I said, how come you say that? And they said, oh, well, I heard you speak somewhere, at Davos, actually. And I said, I wasn't at Davos, actually. And I worked out it was my brother, actually, that they'd heard. I don't want to speak for long, but I would just want to make, I guess, 3 points. One, about why I think the social enterprise, social entrepreneurship movement is so important. Second, about what can government do to help facilitate social innovation. And third, I want to make a point about politics and the role of politics. Let me start by saying a little bit briefly about my job and about social enterprise in that context. I'm the Minister for the Third Sector. I don't love the term either, to the person that asked the question, but it is, I think, a meaningful term because it embraces value-driven organizations, socially driven organizations, from the smallest community organization, the smallest voluntary organization, as we'd call it in this country, to the largest social enterprise. And it's trying really to span that spectrum. But I want to just say something about social enterprise because I've been minister in this job for about 10 months or so. And in a way, the most exciting people I meet are social entrepreneurs and people running social enterprises. And why is that? I think it's for two reasons, really. One, because social enterprise is driving a big change in the private sector to take account of ethical values. And it is a drive which goes beyond the immediate impact of the social enterprises themselves. And secondly, it's driving a big change in the public sector to be more focused on users in its delivery of public services. And I think those two changes will only grow over the coming years, and I think they are incredibly important. And for me, and John mentioned my background, the first of these, the notion of profits and justice not being in conflict but going hand in hand, is a challenging concept. My dad, as John said, was an emigre from Belgium. He joined the British Navy. He read Marx while, as he put it, not being a very successful petty officer in the Navy, and he became a Marxist. And for him, and this is in a way the values I grew up with, for him, yes, you should be angry about injustice, yes, you should do something to tackle it, but it was about the state and what the state could do. And I suppose, in a way, what social enterprise teaches me, and this is where the ethical values of social enterprises are important, is that actually all around the world, in Britain and elsewhere, social enterprises are showing us how you can make the marketplace more fair through what they do. And I think that is incredibly important. And what is also very interesting to me is that you have huge numbers of young people in this country for whom that is an incredibly compelling message, who want to be part of that movement. Now, government doesn't create the inspiration of social enterprise, but what I've learned, I suppose, is that it can help or hinder what social enterprises do. On the private sector side, social enterprises operating in the marketplace, I think one thing that government needs to do is to spread the message about social enterprise. Only 1 in 4 people in Britain know what a social enterprise is. That is a huge loss in terms of the people who might go into social enterprise, the people who might invest in social enterprise, the people who might buy from social enterprise. And Muhammad Yunus says, look, we need to create a separate class of company which recognizes social enterprise. In Britain, we've created something called community interest companies. There are 10 registering every week, which recognizes the notion of an ethically driven business that wants to lock in its community values. So I think that's one thing that we need to do, a sense of recognition of what social enterprise can do. That's not just government, but it's government working with the sector. I'm interested in the idea of a social investment stock market, which I know the Skoll Centre has been looking into. There are also issues around finance, and I think someone raised this as a question, which I think government cannot answer, but it can partly help address, and happy to discuss that in questions. I think the other way that government needs to foster social innovation, though, is in thinking about itself as customer. In particular in the delivery of public services. I think it demands that in the future we are far more open about the way we deliver public services, about who delivers them, about understanding that expertise and innovation comes from the front line, not from the centre. It comes from those who know most about the particular issues that are being faced. I also think it is breaking down in a way, I think this is partly what Bill was saying, it is breaking down social innovation, the traditional divide between professionals in public services and those to whom they deliver. If you think about the way in which peer-to-peer support, peer-to-peer engagement is growing not just in the conventional ways that we would think about it, but also in relation to healthcare, for example, where actually for people with a chronic disease problem, actually the support of other users with that chronic disease is perhaps more important than their relationship with the professional. I think it demands a big change in the way we think about the organization and the delivery of public services and who has a major role in them. So I think there are profound implications for government of this movement. And that's my second point. I suppose my third point, though, is what is the relationship of all this to politics? How does social innovation engage with politics? And I suppose my plea at this conference, and not just because I'm a politician, would be let's not ignore politics in this. I think Bill is right about change makers and what they can achieve. But I think it's also right to say that there are huge structural injustices in our society, many of which social entrepreneurs and social innovators draw attention to, which cannot be solved without politics and government. If you think about the trade rules, and what they do in relation to developing countries, if you think about the resources that social innovators often need to grow, Jamie Oliver, famous chef in this country, has had an absolutely fantastic campaign to change people's perceptions about school meals and to say, look, school meals for kids in schools are just simply not good enough. But Jamie Oliver rightly recognised that it was for government to then say, well, look, we should properly invest in school meals. And, you know, in a sense, he recognised that politics was relevant to what he was doing. And I think the other thing I would say here is that social innovators and social enterprise have a huge capacity to change politics. When I think about the most recent and successful social innovations, and Larry in a way talked about them, when you think about the environmental movement and what it's doing, it is about, yes, engagement with people and what they need to do in everyday lives, but it is also about engagement with government and realizing that government has to change and government has to recognize that this is a problem. When you think about Make Poverty History in 2005, which had a huge effect in this country and I know elsewhere, and I had 8-year-olds in my constituency wearing wristbands and saying, are you part of Make Poverty History? When you think about that, that is about recognizing that social innovation can drive huge change in politics. And it's not about social innovation somehow being separate from politics, getting on with its job separately and leaving politics to get on with it. And I suppose that is the point I would end on. Politics needs social innovation. Politics needs movements for social change. That was what Larry, I think, was talking about in part. And I think we need to think about movements for social change in a very broad way. Because, yes, it's about the environmental movement. Yes, it's about Make Poverty History. But yes, it's also about what individual social entrepreneurs are doing in their everyday businesses. Let me just end with a mention of one person who's in the audience, who's Amy Carter, who's the British Social Entrepreneur of the Year. Amy set up an ecotourism business in Mozambique, which is environmentally sustainable, which is employing local people, and is recycling those profits back to the people of the village in which it is based. Now, that is an incredibly important innovation, and it is changing lots of people's lives. But it's also important because it changes people's perceptions about what they should be doing in those everyday lives. Because I bet you that anyone going on holiday to Amy's Lodge comes back a different person, not just because they've had a nice time, but because their perceptions have been changed about a whole range of issues. And so I suppose my final plea really would be that social enterprise has a huge ability to change business, to change the way the state operates, but it also has a huge potential to change politics as well by changing perceptions. So I'm really delighted to have had the chance to be here and talk to you, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
We've got time for at least one round of questions, but just before, hopefully we've got some microphones, but just before we do that, Ed, can I just ask, it's quite possible for governments to send out people who are young, inspired, and get it to talk to the outside world when the bulk of government doesn't. What's it like selling this agenda to your colleagues, including people like Gordon Brown?
Oh, he's a great supporter. Look, I think there's a big perception change that needs to take place. I think fundamentally it's about the way people think about business. And the way people think about a social business and what it does. There was some people may have talked about this already at the conference. If so, I apologise. But there's a program in this country called Dragon's Den, which interviews budding entrepreneurs. And they had someone on recently who was talking about the way in which they wanted to combine setting up a business but recycling the profits to a charitable organisation. And all the dragons who were interviewing her just didn't get it at all and said, look, there's business and there's charity and the two things are separate and, next contestant, please. And I think in a way that indicates how much further we've got to go in changing perceptions about what social business and social enterprise can achieve.
Thank you. I have one here. Any other questions, comments? Another one.
My name is Grain Sak, Jerome Sak. I have been a member of parliament from Thailand, advisor to various prime ministers. I'm very interested in both what Bill and Ed has been talking about the politics sector. And I want to propose something concrete. Bill said that government sector need to be helped, and I agree with you totally. And Ed, you are the minister in charge of this. I feel such a sense of frustration over many years of my life advising prime ministers and discover that politics, instead of helping, has many times been a hindrance to works of this kind. How do we get around this? Let me just throw some ideas and get your response to this. I'm here basically, as myself and a senator friend of mine from Thailand are here because we are totally sold out to believe in proliferation of social enterprises and social entrepreneurs. And I want to use Thailand as a model example eventually in the future if my dreams come to pass. I joined politics out from academia. I was a professor of economics. I come in wanting to advocate policies where government not hinder but help facilitate it in a real way, because we can't do much as politicians. We only have a window of opportunity for 2 or 3 years, 4 years maximum, and we have to be worried about the votes all the time. Therefore, we need your help to get us able to do the real thing.
Thank you. Can I just take that as the first question and pass it across to either or both of you?
Let me just finish one sentence so that you, my advocacy is this. Why don't we bind together a group of politicians concerned for social entrepreneurship, and then let's work world scale. That politicians work together to help one another push this agenda so that we facilitate social entrepreneurship. And I have seen some concrete ideas to do this. Behind this microphone, maybe we can talk. And let's move this thing as a world agenda so politicians around the world gather together to do this, to help them rather than hinder them. And I'll conclude with these brief comments.
Okay, thank you.
Look, you ask a very, very important question. The way I think about this is in 3 ways. What can government do? One, it can champion social enterprise, and I mentioned that. One of the things we're trying to do is build social enterprise into the education curriculum. It's currently not in the when people study business, social enterprise is not a part of it. That is a huge loss to social enterprise, and in a way people are being told half the story about what business can do. So we've got to champion it in a whole range of ways. Secondly, we can be a catalyst. So we can, as I said in my speech, we can't be the people who are going to end up financing every social enterprise that needs to grow, but we can find ways of trying to stimulate the market in social enterprise. That's one of the things we're trying to do, and I'm happy to send you details about what we're trying to do in this country. And thirdly, social enterprise as customer, in relation to public, or rather government as customer, in its relationship to public services, and we're finding ways to do this in this country, from waste and recycling to health. How do you engage social enterprise as a way of solving some of the problems that government has? Government, yes, continues to fund public services, but the delivery can be done by social enterprises.
Thank you. Bill?
I think we have a really deep structural problem, and it can't be this or that minor adjustment. The political leadership has to lead here. The institutions are stuck. The people in them are not at fault. They're as much the victims as anyone. And so how does one cause this change? We've got basically 19th century institutions that are repetitive function models in a world that doesn't have very many repetitive functions left. What you probably need as a generalization, and I'm talking about the regulatory and operating side for the moment, is a series of project management. And that means project management teams. So how do you get from these very heavy bureaucracies in a situation where you have very little political capital to use for this sort of transformation? I think you'd probably do it by starting to create project teams, dealing with the personnel and contract and other areas that would block this change, by breaking them voluntarily up into volunteer profit centers, very familiar in business. So you now have, just to take foreign assistance, which is an area that's probably of interest to many people here, what are some of the things that we need to change? Well, getting rid of diseases is one of the classic areas for project teams. That's one of the things that has really worked. Jimmy Carter and guinea worm, it's a 20-year project. It's not a 1 or 2 year budget cycle project. It requires a completely different type of organization. Now, if we started any development organization in the world, you could take on a volunteer basis a few people to say, all right, you're a project team to deal with guinea worm. Or how do we change the whole way shepherds, their value-added chain? You take any problem like that in a small project team with a 5-year annuity to get started, encourage them to make it an international project team. And you've got to deal with the contracts and personnel side, because otherwise they'll frustrate you. If it takes 3 years to process a contract, the project team is dead. In USAID, there are 600 people who do contracting. The maximum economy of scale for contracting is 5. So you could have 10 teams, and it would be less than 10% volunteering, and you suddenly have a new ecosystem of, say, 20 or 30 project teams. The second year, more people will volunteer. You haven't reorganized, you haven't threatened anyone. What you've got to do is change what you're doing, the institutional arrangement, and the politics. And these project teams, they actually accomplish things. So you can go to all the underemployed Congress people, to take the US example again, who have got a very frustrating job. They can't say they've done very much. And you can say, all right, you want to help change the lives of the 5 million shepherds in the world? We can do that. And we'll give you photos with them and whatnot. Well, it's actually quite easy to do, but this is going to require political leadership. It's going to require social entrepreneurs from the outside working with the political leadership, working with whoever is inside those institutions who wants to break free. And all you have to do is get 1 or 2 that suddenly become a modern. It'll take 3, 4, 5 years before you can tip the institution, but what will happen with the civil servants inside is you're freeing them. This is a nightmare for them. Just talk to anyone in these institutions, what their life is like. The energy you can release, it's incredible. And so you can create a positive dynamic. But I'm just giving you one example. Until we are able to think at this larger time frame, larger political type of leadership, we're stuck. We've been stuck for a long time. And I just think it's tragic. I obviously believe in government. That's why I fought, literally, the name of our organization was Save EPA. You have to have these functions. But it's tragic for the people and it's tragic for the public, and it's a major task for political leadership to take on. And your best ally is us.
Thank you, Bill. I'm afraid we've run up against the time buffers, and so in the interests of letting the next panel come on, what I'd like to do is just ask Ed for final comments. He said that he wasn't unique, but I do think, I can't remember who it was, it may have been Churchill, said, extraordinary times call forth extraordinary leaders and extraordinary leadership. And any final closing comments from you would be very welcome.
Well, I suppose my final comment would be, I just think this movement has incredibly exciting possibilities. And I think we're already seeing a lot of those possibilities being realized. And I think I do agree with Bill that we need to think big about these things. And I think some of the things that the Skoll Centre is doing around, as I said, the social investment stock market, some of the other ideas, I think are incredibly important, because I sort of feel like anyone who knows about and understands what social enterprise is about is immediately a convert. The problem is not enough people know about it, and we need to find as many different ways as possible of converting people to the cause, because I think by converting people to the cause there is a possibility of very profound change in many different areas.
Thank you. Thank you both, Bill and Ed. And I'd like to hand over to Stefan and to Roger Martin, but just as we leave, just add, I think, our pile of thanks to the already huge heap of gratitude that's piled up for Jeff and Sally and their team. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, John, Ed, Bill. It's my very great pleasure now to introduce the concluding panel of this year's forum, and to introduce Roger Martin, who's Dean of the Joseph L. Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. He serves on the Skoll Foundation board and will introduce our panelists this afternoon. Roger.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and I can't help but want to say publicly thank you to Bill. I think when writer types put pen to paper, and I think my beloved thinking and writing buddy Sally Osberg does it the best we can possibly hope for, is to have a visionary leader of the field say it was useful. So thank you very much for the kind words, Bill. I have the pleasure of looping us right back to the social entrepreneurs. We have got 4 Skoll Award-winning entrepreneurs here. We've got from the class of 2005, Martin Fisher from Kickstart. We've got from the class of 2006, Mindy Lubber from Sears and Taddy Blecher from CETA. And from the freshly minted class of 2007, Roshaneh Zafar from Kashaf. And what I'd like to ask them is the following 2 questions, and that is, what's the single most important thing that you learned from this conference, from soaking up this wonderful events of this conference, and how has that influenced your thoughts on social innovation in general, or your organization in particular? And maybe we'll start with 2005. Martin, what thoughts do you have on that?
Well, thank you. First of all, let me say thanks to Skoll. And as with all great meetings like this one, I learned a huge amount, both, of course, in the sessions and equally importantly from the conversations that we have outside in the corridors. Met a lot of great people and learned about incredible new social enterprise models. And we learned about models that are finding brand new ways to overcome major market and political failures, to tackle the very world's very, very biggest problems. And of course, we've heard about everything from education and poverty in Africa to global warming. But at the same time, from being here, I was reminded again that what is still in short supply is the supply of philanthropic capital. There's still a shortage of funds, and the funds that are there are still very hard to for the social entrepreneurs to get. In fact, every social entrepreneur I met is spending far too much of their time, her or his time, working to raise money, instead of doing what they really should be doing and what they do best, which is to innovate and implement new models that will change the world. But we also heard reasons for hope about this. We heard of new humanistic capitalism. We heard of innovative and hybrid funding models. And we heard of lots of new private and public sector partnerships models, which can give us hope and make me encouraged. But nonetheless, we still have a long way to go. But after listening to all this, what I've come to the conclusion is that what we really need to be working on as we go forward is to try to work to create the next big thing, the next big things, let me say, or the next equivalent of microfinance. And the reason I use the plural is because there are many, many things which can be equivalent to microfinance that have the same potential and the same impacts that microfinance is having. And when we look at microfinance, we know that thanks to the innovations and tireless persistence of Muhammad Yunus and many other social entrepreneurs worldwide, microfinance has today actually reached a tipping point where we're in a situation where it's known about everywhere, where it's already brought impacts. I think yesterday we heard 113 million borrowers, and where billions of dollars, both philanthropic donations and profitable investments, are being poured into the field. And it's presently growing in leaps and bounds and is set to provide relief and opportunities for really all the people, all the poor people in the world. But what would it take to create the next big thing, the next equivalent of microfinance? And to do this, in my mind, we need innovative models that, like I said, overcome market and political failures in the same way that microfinance proved the supposed impossibility, overcame the supposed impossibility of giving fair price credit to the very poorest people in the world. And just like microfinance, these new models have to meet some particular criteria. They have to have proven and measurable impacts on the problems they're trying to solve. These impacts have to be highly cost-effective, because remember, the funds are in very short supply. And like microfinance, in my mind, they need to have a sustainable and proven exit strategy from philanthropic donor funds. And there's different ways to do that. And of course, they also need to be scalable in a single location and then replicable into many, many other locations. And finally, we heard yesterday that for things to succeed like this, we need to be able to tell great stories about those successes, or they won't be able to. So we have to find these, we have to pick them, and then we have to take them to scale, to this tipping point. And to do that, we have to remember very clearly that it's taken microfinance 30 years and hundreds of millions of dollars of consistent investment to reach the place where it is today. So to get to a tipping point, any of these new innovations are going to take a large amount of time and a large amount of money. Now, we've learned a lot in the past 30 years, and I'm sure that we can do it quicker than that. But nonetheless, the time and money will have to be there. So to do this, that means very long-term commitments for the social entrepreneurs and organizations that are putting these models in place, and even more importantly, major long-term commitments by the philanthropic donors, investors, and governments to finance these innovations, to take it to the tipping point over many years. But I am reinvigorated after being here for the last few days, and like Larry, brilliant optimistic, because I think what we've seen here in the last few days, for me at least, I'm convinced that between us, we're actually up for this challenge. And what's more, I'm convinced that actually in this very room, we have the social entrepreneurs, we have the models, we have the supporters to create the next big things, the next microfinance. And the next microfinance is right here. And to bring these things to the tipping point where they're posed to solve the biggest problems in the world on a global scale. So like Muhammad said, I say, let's just make it happen.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Martin. And if we can go to 2006, Mindy, your
Great,
thoughts.
thanks. Like you, like Larry, brilliant. I think I'm an incurable optimist, and nothing about the last 3 days has changed that. If anything, what a wonderful way to depart, feeling more optimistic than ever before. 25 years ago, so I used to torture myself to think about what is the best way to make change. Is it being in business? Is it being an entrepreneur? Is it being a litigator, which I spent a lot of time being? Is it being a government regulator? And no doubt government has a very important role. Is it being an organizer? Is it going door to door? Is it stopping nuclear power plants from being built? The very important takeaway message for me is that it's all of those things, and that we are not going to solve the world's problems on the scale that we're talking about, whether it's poverty or famine or AIDS or global warming, without being as clever and creative and savvy and collegial and collaborative and smart about how to solve those problems. The discussions here today are an extraordinarily important part of that discussion. How do we come up with new ideas and new solutions and new ways of doing things? And it's unbelievably inspiring to sit here and learn about and hear about and do things and be part of the Skoll family. But I was also reminded about the fact that we need to build our social entrepreneurship efforts into the larger group of power bases. We need to change the conversations in all sorts of different places. We need to use our roles as social entrepreneurs to spur new ideas, to be a catalyst to move things, to be very clear on problems and what we want to solve and how we do it. We've got great thinkers in the room. We've got lofty ideas. We've got problems bigger than anything we know. We've got solutions out there. This group is great at spurring solutions and coming up with part of the vision for getting there. But I do think it's important, and something that I learned in many of the discussions, and we talked about it at the dinner that Ed convened last night. Somebody said, should government be part of these solutions? I can't imagine government not being part of these solutions. It's our job to tee up issues and to prove concepts that perhaps nobody would have believed were possible to solve some of the world's problems. But we can't get there alone. We've got to be savvy and shrewd about convening the players, changing the conversation. But how could anyone imagine that solving the problems of the poor and delivering housing and solving global warming doesn't involve the power, the resources of government? Government has a role in life. Government has taxing ability. Government has resources. We need to marshal that in the smartest ways. We need to help government move out of the laden down bureaucracies. I ran a small government agency, 900-person regional office of the Environmental Protection Agency. And I learned many things. I learned that it is laden down with bureaucracy and moves slow. But I also was reminded that there were enormous resources. Somebody wrote me a check for $700 million to do what I had to do that year. And there were 900 people who believed in protecting the environment. We've got to marshal those resources in a way we're coming up with problem solving. And we've got to bring in the private sector, and we've got to bring in investors, and we've got to deliver on our passions. The most passionate people are sitting in this room, but as passionate as we are, and you are, I don't know that I'm so passionate, well, I'm passionate, I don't know about the clever part, as clever as you are at coming up with mechanisms through social entrepreneurial mechanisms to solve problems, we really have to think about taking it to scale. And that's not only taking it to scale, meaning how could I double the size of my budget? But it's taking the scale of how to bring in new players, changing the conversation with them, and making them part of the solution and not part of the problem. The problem that I have been spending a good deal of my time on for the last, I guess, 27 or 28 years, but sustainability in the environment, and are we going to leave a planet for our kids? You know, when I was the regional administrator of the EPA, all of my speeches included a message about Abe and Jesse, my two extraordinary, delightful, delicious children, and them as proxies for your kids and the family, and are we going to leave a future? And somehow, that was okay in the discussion. Now my discussion is with business leaders and investors, but it doesn't matter. Even if I don't talk about Abe and Jesse, we've got to take the arguments and the passion that we believe in and the things that we're doing in our social entrepreneurial ventures and find the oddest players and bedfellows and bring them in so we can meet our passions and the solutions that we set out to solve or the problems and really get to scale. In the world that I'm working in of global warming, 5 years ago, people said bringing the investment community and the corporate community into being part of the solution, not part of the problem, not the adversary, not spending 60% of the time picketing one company or another or ending up at their annual meeting attempting to embarrass a board member or doing something of that sort. We talked about how do you bring in players like that who have huge resources, huge power, huge clout, huge ability to move mountains, in my judgment. And at our first institutional investor summit on climate risk, when we tried to get leaders of Wall Street and some of the largest investors, it was very tough. But we spent years trying to make the case these issues are as much part of the business community and the financial community and changing the conversation. And now we've got business leaders every day saying we need to be part of the solution of global warming. And at our last investor summit on climate risk, every leading Wall Street firm sent their managing directors to be part of thinking about how to be part of the solution, to limit risk, to mitigate risk, and to find investments in clean technologies that are going to be part of where we need to go as a world community. March 19th, we brought $4 trillion worth of investors to Washington to say government needs to act on global warming, put mandatory controls in place, but it was the power of the corporate leaders and the investor leaders and the numbers like $4 trillion that are moving policymakers. We had 5 different committee chairmen call within a week saying we want to do hearings on the financial impacts of global warming. The point isn't not what happened on March 19th with $4 trillion of investors, some of the people in the room, that as social entrepreneurs, and we talked a lot about getting to scale, some of our conversations about how we could get to scale. And I'd love to quadruple the size of the organization I work for, and we all want to do that, and we are passionate about what we do. But getting to scale when we think about the problems that we're all setting out to address, the problems that truly are about our future and about Abe and Jesse. I could talk about them here, even if I don't talk about them in speeches at the New York Stock Exchange or at the Council of Institutional Investors. But if Abe and Jesse are to have a future, and they clearly as proxies for your children and nieces and nephews and grandchildren, we've got to get to scale in ways we've never thought about. We've got to bring in the oddest bedfellows. We have got to be talking to people we haven't talked about. It is not only about us getting to scales within our organizations or within our small communities, but bringing in the massive resources of government, of the investment community, of the corporate community, of the religious community. These are indeed as much religious, moral problems, and economic problems as they are anything else. And we've got to see it that way. You know, for years, somehow global warming was an issue that scientists care about, dweeby scientists who knew a lot about data and statistics that none of us understood, and it was about what environmentalists cared about. And somehow it was separate from the fact that corporate leaders should care about it. They've got families too, and they've got futures of their businesses that are dependent upon the resources that will be devastated. We have got to get to scale, and I think getting to scale, and some of the conversations we've had here, and I want to end on that, are about a jump unlike anything we've done. We can do it. We're doing it. We're seeing changes. When I hear about the numbers of people that you are providing microfinancing to, when I hear about the things that Taddy's done, it is the most inspiring thing. I will go home triply excited, work 10 times harder, because I see the solutions in place, but we have got to think cleverly and creatively and be savvy about getting to scale and finding resources unlike anything we've seen. It can be done. We're going to get there, but we have got to be strategic, smart, focused, disciplined, not just passionate and visionary, as so many of you are, but practical, clever. We're going to get there. We've got no choice. Larry's example of what it took to deal with smallpox is a wonderful, heartening example of it can be done. It can be. I look forward to working with all of you as we set out on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Mindy. Taddy, over to you.
I think the first, there's so many things that we learned. I think the first is just how amazing this group of people are who've come to the Skoll Forum. And I think everyone dancing together last night in the Sheldonian, I think a lot of bodies were turning in their graves last night, seeing that happening in Oxford. But I think such a sign of the rising of humanity, and there's just tremendous goodness. So I think we should just clap for all of you for just being here and being so great. I think what we've all learned, and again, is that we shouldn't bet against humanity, and we shouldn't bet against human beings, because human beings are so extraordinarily creative, resourceful, infinite, and it's really this tremendous time that we live in now, where it just feels like this huge race, and it just so much is possible, but so quickly. on either side of the race, for good or for destruction. And I think, opportunities with the internet, with technology, quantum physics says at the deepest level we are one, and I think what the internet, etc., does is it really accelerates that feeling of oneness and connectedness. But I remember last year being here and Al Gore's presentation, and that was just 1 year ago. And when Jeff was talking about that, I mean, it's incredible. I was very lucky to be in Belgium last week, just talking to 3 young kids, and I was talking to them about math and so on. And I said, "Do they learn anything about global warming in their school?" And it's the second time I've ever been to Belgium, and they said, "Global warming, gee, we get it every day. It's like non-stop in school." What do you learn? Well, okay, everybody in our school has seen an inconvenient truth. In fact, everybody in the country in any school has to see an inconvenient truth. There's all these workbooks we go through. It comes up in almost every class, and we learn about this and that and the other. So, I mean, it is incredible, the possibilities to bring change. And I mean, I think, again, we should just thank visionaries like Jeff Skoll for doing something like that. So I think in this very, very extraordinary time, there's just such opportunities for us to come to our full humanity now. And really, when there's potential of no tomorrow, I think there's opportunities to love like there's no tomorrow. There's opportunities to create like there's no tomorrow. There's opportunities to give like there's no tomorrow. And this is really the greatness of humanity, because life is always changing. There's always been challenges, but there's that part of us which is always there. And there's those things that are just timeless. And we're sitting here in this Nelson Mandela Theatre, and I was very blessed to meet Nelson Mandela twice. And the one was when we were just starting out with CEDA, and went to go see him and sat in his living room. And he was the president of a country that he had been in jail for 27 years for. And he was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And we were one chair short in the room, and it was my chair. And so I came in, and this room was full. And of course, Nelson Mandela jumped up and gave his chair. And it's that greatness of the human spirit that I think we're in this room. We're at this moment in history, at this moment in life, and absolutely anything is possible. So I think just some of the things we really have to do, and this is what's so exciting about bringing social entrepreneurship together with media. And Jeff was talking the other day about the need for video games, TVs, movies. We've got to get out to the youth. The youth are not sitting here. The youth are sitting and watching the biggest load of rubbish on television every day, and minds just being corrupted. I mean, spirituality has been taken out of pretty much all the schools all over the world. Youth are just learning about plastic things, but are desperate to find meaning. And so it's vitally important that the only thing that's going to get us to the levels we've got to get to is we've got to be more brave. Mindy said this, we've got to be a lot more courageous. We're all afraid. There's just so much fear. I mean, everywhere I go, in the world, I mean, the basic essential humanity is goodness. People want to do good. They want to live a better life. They're just afraid. And so I think the movies we make, the video games we make, are going to make people more brave than they fear. And this is what we have to do. We have to increase levels of bravery to overcome fear so that we can quickly make the changes we have to. I think just the last thing I really learned was Muhammad Yunus said this incredible thing about business, always being thought of in terms of just making a profit. And because it's boxed in that way, the whole world's worked in that way. But in fact, everything in society is boxed. We box the way we think about universities, the way we think about government. There's just innumerable boxes that we've put in society and stereotypes and so on. And I think one of the incredible roles that social entrepreneurs can play is blurring boundaries. And I think that's what we do. We have to take off blinkers. We have to show that these boxes don't need to be there. Business doesn't have to be that way. Education doesn't have to be this way. Schools don't have to be that way, etc. And I think that's a very big role that we've got to play. But just all of our collective attention, and again what Mindy said, it's not about us, any of us as individuals. It's this is our one world, and we just have to do what is bigger than any one of us collectively to make this world different and create the world we want. So we need a massive change in consciousness in the world, and I think that's what we have to work on.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Roshaneh from the class of 2007.
Thank you, Roger. I'd like to thank Jeff and Sally in particular for giving me this opportunity. This is a moment to celebrate. And I want to celebrate Suraya, and I want to share a story with you. The story of Suraya, for which I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to go and envisage a slum area in the city of Lahore, which goes on for miles and miles and is built on top of a sewer line. Every time the monsoons hit, the sewage boils over into people's houses. This is where Suraya lives. 10 years ago, Suraya's life was very difficult, not only because her husband was a drug addict, but also because after 10 years of marriage, she had only managed to have one child, and that to a girl. Her mother-in-law was constantly telling her husband to remarry again so that he could produce an heir, a son. So this is what life was like for Suraya. There was no income coming into the house. However, she gathered her courage and she decided to learn a new skill. She went to her neighbor's house and began to learn how to make bicycle decorations. For 30 cents each day, she used to go there for 8 hours to eke out those 30 cents so she could feed her child. 7 years ago, she heard about Kashf, a microfinance institution, and she decided to take a loan of $60 to start her own bicycle decoration business. Today, Suraya has hired 15 other women and earns $500. And the last time, per month, the last time I met her, she had purchased a cell phone for her husband, which had made her husband love her even more, as she told me. And not to forget, she also, when I asked her what was she doing with her daughter, she said, I'm sending her to school. She's going to an English medium school, and I hope she becomes a lawyer so that she can take on women's issues in my community. So hearing about stories like Suraya, there are thousands of them. The one thing I realized that it's first a very humbling experience. On the other side, it gives us the imperative to grow. And the issue that I'm faced with after listening to everyone over these 2 days is, why is scale important? And what does it mean? When I begin to think about scale, I think about it helping me realize our mission of access and inclusion, about generating social equity, about generating meaningful significance and having impact. It's about transforming systems and policies, and that's why scale becomes important. But how big is big enough? When I think of my own institution and I think of our plans to grow up to 1 million clients by 2010, that's only 8% of the poor people in Pakistan. So I begin to feel even more humbled. The other issue that I realized is very important for us is about understanding impact. Impact means many things. It's about understanding social value, about understanding social impact, about having rigorous tools, whether it's through randomization of sampling or whether we come up with other measures for understanding the impact of the work that we do. We also need to set up systems which will internalize ways of understanding the impact of our, or the social value that we generate. It's about gauging results continuously. So again, for me, social innovation around this area is very necessary. It also brings up the issue of effectiveness and sustainability, and this reminds me of a story with Professor Yunus. When I first began Kashf 11 years ago, I realized at that time it was very difficult for me to start this because, and I think Professor Yunus realized this. He realized here is someone who is a perfectionist. She sets these bars and those are very high. So he said something to me, and that is a caveat that I want to share with all of you. He said to me, Roshaneh, if you make a mistake, tell the world it's Professor Yunus's fault. And that made me realize that it's okay to make mistakes and it's very important to experiment. So one of the things that I learned and which was reaffirmed by my 2 days here was the fact that experimentation, innovation is really the crux of the matter. It is really the core of what we do. And there are many ways to talk about effectiveness and sustainability. We talked about that at Ed's dinner last night. It's through partnerships, and partnerships can mean many things. It's through public partnership, it's through private partnership. And somebody actually, my friend Joanna Mayer, mentioned that we are the fourth sector, meaning thereby we combine, we run not-for-profits, and at the same time we have for-profit engagements as well. So she defined this as the fourth sector. It's about improving systems via innovation. And if we talk about microfinance, technology is actually beginning to play a very important role in innovating new systems and procedures and in bringing down transactional costs. And by technology, we mean using cellular technology. You have clients making their repayments through cellular phones, through mobile phones. So that is really a way of bringing down transactional costs. It's about franchising, or looking at new ways of franchising, what we call McDonald's meets microfinance. And there are many ways of replicating this. As Professor Yunus said, if you've done it once, you can do it 6 billion times. And that's really the crux. That's really the crux. That's the simple idea. You do it once, you do it again. And I think the point that Martin has already raised, and we can do this again, we can do it 6 billion times, but the one thing that stops us is financial, or access to financial resources. And I think it's very important to look at ways of innovating financing. Ed mentioned a social stock exchange, and Professor Yunus also referred to that. I think that's a great idea. There are ways of generating patient capital, of getting equity that will stay with the institution for a long time. There are other ways. You look at quasi-equity or subordinated debt. There are ways of floating social bonds if we had a social market. But it also goes back to the issue of coming up with a mechanism of social rating for our organization, going back to what Mindy's work is on environment, extending that same tool to looking at social rating for institutions like ours. There is a need of looking at access to capital markets. How do we do that? What transparency is required to ensure us to access that market? There is also need of innovating on distribution channels and origination capacity. Again, if I refer to microfinance, which is the field that I know best, we have examples of microfinance institutions twinning with supermarkets. That, again, cuts down costs. It's been done in, for example, in Mexico with Comportamos. So there are ways of looking at innovation within every sector in order to make us more efficient and more responsive to the needs of those we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your thoughts and comments. And I thought I'd just very quickly answer the question myself from the perspective of a Skoll Foundation board member. Whenever I come to a conference like this and hear a whole lot of really smart people from different perspectives talk about the same thing, I know there's something going on there. And I heard Greg Dees, Joanna Meyer, Roberto Gutierrez, Piera Morlacci, and Ignacio Marti all talk about the importance of ecosystems and building a broad ecosystem for this. And certainly that's going to be, and I'm sure those are just 5 that happen to be in my sessions. There are probably other brilliant people in other sessions that I wasn't at that were also talking about the same thing. But certainly that reinforces, in terms of what to do going forward, that reinforces, for me at least, the important role that the Skoll Foundation has carved out in the Connect and Celebrate part of the mandate. It's just not just invest, which is tremendously important, and Martin started off indicating how important that is, but in the Connect and Celebrate, and that certainly reinforces in my mind how important that part of our mandate is to support the ecosystem that all of you are part of growing in those ways. What I'd love you to do now, while we exit the stage and as Dean Colin Meyer comes up, is to answer the questions yourself. Turn to the person next to you, tell that person what's the one most important thing you learned at this conference, and more importantly, what's the one thing you're going to do going forward on the basis of that. And we'll leave while you think, and Colin will come up. Thank you all. You were great. Very well. Thank you so much. Nicely done. Nicely done.
Ladies and gentlemen, well, perhaps you may have conveyed the key messages, and if not, there will be plenty of time afterwards. In his remarks at the start of this forum, Stephen Chambers talked about an extraordinary combination of energy, intellect, and focus being addressed at questions of social innovation. Few can deny that we've had exactly that. The last 3 days have witnessed a remarkable breadth of material, issues, and suggestions that will leave us thinking for months to come. That, to my mind, is what this forum is all about. It's about inspiring and motivating, learning from others what works and what does not work. The lasting impression that I think we've all had from this forum is that there is a revolution in process, not the type of political and scientific revolutions which societies have lived through in the past, but a quiet economic and social revolution that is redefining the way in which people are addressing the needs of societies around the world. There's an overwhelming sense that while the economic prosperity that has been delivered to a few is remarkable, the failure to solve the problems of the many is unacceptable. What we're hearing in numerous different ways are new ideas and new approaches to delivering solutions to old problems. On just the opening day, we heard about Michael Young, Peter Ryan, and Mo Abraham, to name but a few. What is particularly interesting about these people and ideas, and what differentiates them from the past, is that they seek to work with and improve existing institutions and markets and not against them. Muhammad Yunus put it superbly when he talked about lifting the lid of the container. We do not have to convince people. We have to give them the means to realize what they want to do. And that, to my mind, is the most exciting part of what the social entrepreneurship agenda is encouraging us to address. How do we allow the lid to be lifted? What does it take in terms of institutional design to allow new activities that perform a social function to emerge? I want to illustrate in relation to the example that Muhammad Yunus discussed on Tuesday, and that is the emergence of investment funds to invest in microfinance projects. Yunus referred to the case of Denon, but there are several examples of where investment funds of various descriptions are looking to invest in these areas. The implications are potentially formidable. Organizations that previously operated with very limited sources will potentially find themselves the recipients of vast resources. Whether they will be able to sustain their original purpose and continue to operate with the degree of integrity and prudence that they have done to date will be a major challenge. The analogy with traditional areas of entrepreneurship is, I think, clear. The phenomenal growth of entrepreneurship over the last few decades is in no small part due to a similar institutional innovation. Until a few years ago, people would routinely talk about an equity gap, a failure to be able to raise equity finance for small companies. While this has not entirely gone away, it's largely been ameliorated by the emergence of private equity in a variety of different forms. The institutional innovation of venture capital has been to link the large investment funds of the pension funds, life insurance companies, to the needs of small businesses by inserting general partners between them. Previously, there were investors who knew little about startup firms and entrepreneurs who did not have adequate financing, and little way in which the two could talk to each other. The general partners, frequently successful entrepreneurs who want to manage large portfolios, bridge that gap. What we are now seeing via microfinance is not dissimilar to that, and the social implications are potentially enormous. I use this as an illustration of what I think is the general challenge that social entrepreneurship presents. Not only can we identify new institutions to bridge such gaps and solve what is frequently referred to as market failures, but can we rationalize and generalize their existence as well? To quote a famous economist, I do not trust anything that does not work in theory. That remark is not quite so flippant as it sounds, because the lid to which Eunice referred does not actually reflect the inability to invent new institutions, but to persuade people about their validity. That process of persuasion rests critically on providing an intellectual underpinning to what we observe going on. And that is what I see as the most interesting and exciting challenge that faces the Skoll Centre here at the Side Business School going forward. We are looking to provide an intellectual underpinning to a subject that everyone here believes to be critically important. We are doing that not only because it is an intellectually exciting endeavour, which unquestionably it is, but because it is central to ensuring that social entrepreneurship makes a long-term and enduring contribution to the world in which we live. It's a tough and demanding challenge, but it's one to which we in the Side Business School are determined to rise and to which we hope that many of you will wish to contribute. In closing this forum, I'd like to pay tribute to the remarkable contribution that many people have made to its success. Organising a conference of some 700 people anywhere in the world is a challenge, but to do so in an ancient university where the electricity fails in the Sheldonian a few hours before the forum is due to open, and systems are better suited to individual tutorials than classes of a few hundred, is particularly demanding. I'd therefore like to pay tribute to Liz Nelson, Sumita Maheshwari, Pippa Hitchens, and Andrea Westall here in the school, and I believe that there are some flowers that are about to be presented. I'd also like to thank those people in catering, AV, and IT, and in particular Matt Davis on the facility side here in the business school, and in the Skoll Foundation to Sandy Hertz and Heather Mason. I'd also like to pay particular tribute to Alex Nichols for the incredible amount of work that he has put into organising the forum, to Rowena Young for her leadership of the centre, to Stephen Chambers, who I'm pleased to be able to report will be playing a key role in the centre going forward as the chairman of the centre, and to Sally Osberg for her unfailing support of the centre throughout. And of course, above all, to Jeff Skoll for his vision in seeing what could and has been created. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all for having made this such an exciting and significant event, and I look forward to welcoming you all to the 2008 World Skoll Forum. There now follows a short film that encapsulates, we hope, the spirit of the forum. Thank you very much.
his teacher looked at him and he said, "You don't get to ask questions here. We just follow rituals." And talking about social innovation, Blecher walked out. He grew his hair long, started to dress outrageously, got an iktara, which is a one-stringed folk instrument, and he composed his first poem, which is "Who Am I? Ki jana main kaun?"
For the next few days, an extraordinary combination of energy, intellect, and focus will be applied to the questions of social innovation.
And so last year, as some of you might recall, we had an ambitious goal to make Bill Drayton and Victoria Hale and Martin Fisher as well known as Britney Spears. Sadly, in the past year, Britney has raised the bar a bit.
This is a special place for ideas and for ideas testing. It is what we do, and it is what we do best.
And this matters because all lasting social change does depend on working with others. As the old proverb says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go with others.
And I think increasingly business is beginning to realise that government can't do anything. Can't do everything, sorry. Maybe I was right first time.